Okay. All right. Welcome. Glad you're here. So this week, I'll continue along the hero's journey or the rebellious nature of the Buddha and kind of unpack some of the teachings. I have an excerpt or two from this book, The Buddha and His Teachings, from a Sri Lankan monk. Is there anyone new to the group who would like to introduce themselves? All right. I think pretty much everyone's been here before, so let's go ahead. We're just going to go ahead and sit in some meditation, have some discussion, Q&A. So finding a posture that's workable, that's sustainable. Settling in. Arriving here. Maybe taking a moment and scanning through the body. Just recognizing what's present in this sitting body. We move through our days, really collecting thousands of bits of information, either through our sensory perception, or our mind, connecting, or having micro emotional experiences throughout the whole day. How often do we really just check in? How is this body doing? What can we notice? Perhaps bringing the awareness to the connection between breath and body, feeling the breath in the body. Tip of the nose, rise and fall the belly. Wherever you can connect to this experience of breathing. Recognizing whatever's happening in the mind. It's bringing some awareness, some attention to the process of the mind without getting kind of lost. Kind of like, seeing a movie in a movie theater. You're solidly in your seat. And there's kind of maybe a story that plays out, or images. Seeing if we can kind of maintain, rooted or connected to the breath and body. While watching the mind, the movie of the mind, without getting lost in it or swept away. And when we recognize that we have been swept away, it's not a problem, with a sense of friendliness or kindness. Just aiming the attention back, reconnecting with the breath and body, the anchor of awareness in this present time experience. When and if you feel reconnected, see if you can shift your attention to the observational view of the mind. Perhaps there's themes. If so, we can begin to label the themes, thinking or future, story. Just continually coming back to the breath and body as an anchor. Let's work with that for some time. Breathing in. Know that you're breathing in. Breathing out. Know that you're breathing out. This practice of being with what is as it is, grasping to nothing, aversive to nothing. Relax, observe, allow whatever arises. And we meet each moment with a sense of ease, a sense of calm, content, and connected. again and again. Just recognizing whatever's happening in this mind, body, present time experience, meeting it with a sense of ease. Kindness. All right. Well, at this point, I guess I'd like to just open up for thoughts, questions, reflections about the last 30 minutes. Did anyone notice a difference in what happens in the mind when there's less instruction? I guess, like just asking yourself, like, okay, so, I mean, there was less instruction. I gave less instruction and created a lot more space. Were you able to, did you come up with your own instructions? Did you have moments where you caught your mind wandering off and then kind of brought it back, like following the instruction that I gave? Or was there some default mode that you fell into? Just curious, you can speak up if you'd like. Yeah, go ahead, Roger.
So for a while, I caught my mind just kind of, squirreling off for a bit. Just dreams, fantasies that just felt like they were filling in time. So after a bit, I did choose to try to work on, how to phrase this, to try to work on allowing impressions on a topic, on a particular area of concern for me, at this point, and just see if I could at least filter out the distractions and do a little, just check in what's going on about this topic. Mm-hmm. And it did seem to help. I did gain a couple of insights, and I think that it was time well spent. Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Great. So you kind of so you followed the instruction for a little while, and then, or the lack thereof, and then you kind of gave your mind a bit of a task. Like there was something, sounds like there was something, some question or some, kind of topic that surfaced, and you just kind of gave it space. In some ways, kind of like the way I was instructing, moving to the mind or toward the mind itself. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's, yes, I think that's a good way to phrase it. Because I didn't try to work towards a solution. I didn't try to pick a solution. I just tried to say,
mm-hmm.
Well, this, you're thinking, you're processing this. I mean, it's, told my mind you want to think about it. Well, let's just give you a chance to look at this and mm-hmm. see what you come up with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in that way, the theme, whatever that theme is, kind of becomes the focus of the mind, or focus of the observational kind of experience, while still staying connected to your body. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So this is, something that I get asked a lot. A lot of people kind of ask, like, what happens when something comes up in the mind? Should I, focus my attention on it? And, my answer is it kind of depends. Generally in the beginning, if there's a lot of agitation, restlessness in the mind, there's a lot of kind of content. We're not trying to chase all of the content, because that's just kind of crazy making. But if we can get quiet and do the kind of like what we were doing today, this kind of present time awareness, and then there's a particular theme, and maybe it's a theme, you've been working on with your recovery or inventory or therapist or, whatever, or just something that is kind of unattended, perhaps. Then I think shifting the attention, this is the third foundation of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of the mind, where we're kind of, once where there's some calm, there's, you've been in the practice for a while, maybe it's a repeated theme, maybe it's a theme that's come up several times, something from the past or something. I think, with some instruction, with some time, it can be really useful. It's a useful direction to kind of create and some kind of open space around, okay, what like, why does this continue to come up? Like, what is it? What's the message here? I think that can be really useful without an agenda, but just kind of presence, right? Presence, and see, does some insight come around it? That has worked for me. I generally don't do that kind of a thing, like personally, unless I've been kind of in a repetitive sitting pattern for a while. Like maybe it's my second sit of the day, or I'm on a retreat and I've been kind of really focused and calming the mind for a period of time. Then I don't know. I kind of don't trust my mind to just jump on whatever topic kind of comes in. So I try to. I want to be a little bit. I want to have a erring on the side of caution, with my mind and what I dwell in. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. I think it can be useful in that third foundation of mindfulness. Anything else? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get into the topic then, just kind of continuing on from last week. The story of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama was, born, and there was some kind of there was a sage or a wise man who gave a prediction at the Buddha's birth, or the Siddhartha's birth, that he would either be a great king or a great healer of the world. And the king, his father, really wanted him to be a great king. Was like, oh, okay, well, so now we have to kind of make that effort to giving him the proper education and teaching him about kind of strategy and war and that kind of thing. And so this was kind of the first part of his life, and he was kind of spoiled, like kind of given whatever he wanted, and had up till his kind of early to mid-20s, where he was married to a neighboring lord, and the daughter of a neighboring lord, so that there was strength in the area. And this was an arranged marriage, and Sundara is what I believe the wife's name was, Sundara. And so the Buddha, or the Buddha to be, Siddhartha at the time, was kind of propelled with some questions. And what we had talked about last week is, the Buddha's mother died shortly after. I was reading the other day, 7 days after his birth. So the Buddha's mother died 7 days after his birth. So, developmentally, there's a childhood wound of abandonment, of loss. And, in some ways, that's so comforting to me in the way that through the suffering of this loss, this kind of curiosity perhaps began to even develop throughout Siddhartha's life, even though he had all of the food and all of the things and all of the fine chariots and servants and, everything, and wanted riches, gold, palaces. That there was something about that, kind of devastating loss that can happen in childhood, in birth, in, infancy, that can really carry on. What we know now in, we call this attachment, attachment theory. Also, the children experiencing a trauma at such an early age can, in infancy and sometimes even in utero, can really carry on in a I don't know, I guess it's kind of like, can be like an existential way. And so I feel like it's really interesting that this is a component that I've told this story, hundreds of times, and it just kind of popped up to me that, okay, so that, yeah, the Buddha at infancy was, had a real trauma, a real traumatic kind of experience. And so kind of fast forward, 20s, married, had a child. His name is Rahula. And felt a deep calling to really find out some answers, some kind of existential, spiritual questions. Compelled the Buddha, the Siddhartha, to become a Buddha. Compelled Siddhartha to really leave what was familiar, predictable, safe, and painful, and set out on a path to become the Buddha. Now, of course, his father didn't like this idea at all. And his mother, who, I didn't talk about this last time. So after his birth mother died, his father married his birth mother's sister so it's kind of the next in line of this, this lord, this family, to kind of keep treaties, perhaps, was done quite a bit, I think, in the old days. Maybe it's even done now, I don't know. But so anyway, there was this calling where here Siddhartha was kind of having everything that they needed, kind of, and there's also these stories that the Siddhartha was sheltered as a child, like kind of as a young person, kind of kept away from the suffering of the world, really. Yet there was this real deep kind of longing for understanding, particularly around death and old age and sickness, that, I think we all are kind of grappling with these questions. So there was a calling, and then there was a departure. So Siddhartha left the palace, left his wife, left his child in search of these kind of answers, and set out and had, I think had some experience with meditation, but not really. Mostly more on a philosophical kind of rites and rituals kind of a way. So and then there's this other piece of the story where, he had to kind of sneak out. Like he couldn't, his father wouldn't just let him leave. He had to kind of run away. He had to jump the wall of his palace and really escape. And he told his wife that he was going to do this. And the way that it's described, he, kissed his child. And, the intention was to find a sense of freedom that, living a privileged life wasn't giving him, having everything that he needed and wanted. So he set out, and then he met with several teachers. One teacher was very much into what's called jhana practice, so this kind of deep levels of meditative practice, concentration practice. And that was kind of his first major teacher. And this, he was able to kind of perfect this technique pretty quickly. And then the leader of the school that he was training at, the monastery, we'll say, recognized that Siddhartha had a great gift, and actually in an act of kind of generosity said, come and teach with me, and we'll kind of manage these students and we'll do this together, and it'd be nice to have a peer. And you've kind of awakened to a point that you can be a teacher. And Siddhartha wasn't quite like, he could sense that there was still this existential, what happens when we die. I haven't overcome my greed, hatred, and delusion. That even though I can very deeply concentrate the mind, and can achieve some really amazing kind of states, that when I come out of this meditative state, that I'm still really reactive and facing the day-to-day problems, and not really knowing how to handle them. So this kind of propelled Siddhartha further, where he kind of refused this offer and said, there's still more to awaken to. There's still more to learn. And so he set out on his own. And then he met a yoga teacher, basically, a sadhu who was very skilled in kind of ascetic practices, so the deep concentration, which he was able to do and he continued to do as a practice. But then there were, other practices around basically kind of doing, extreme levels of yoga and some of the kind of yogic breathing. And this teacher was a little bit more kind of arrogant. So he kind of had this idea of, I am awakened and I have the answer, and very different than his other teacher, Siddhartha's other teacher, who was very kind of gracious and kind of, I see you as an equal now, and come and let's teach together, in this very generous way. This other teacher was just a little bit more kind of, there was a lot of ego involved. And basically at some point, the Siddhartha decided to leave this teaching as well, like just again seeing like, okay, this teacher, maybe there's some awakening, some freedom, that they've experienced, but not a full release. There's still a lot of ego, there's still a lot of kind of arrogance, there's a lot of attachment, right? So Siddhartha kind of set out on his own and began to, he found a little squad, a crew of other ascetics that were just practicing together, but yet on their own and kind of looking out for each other. And so he continued on his own with this group. And this is, where in the trajectory of the story, this is where we're calling the struggle. So the struggle for awakening, the struggle toward awakening, which, this calling, this departure, this struggle, we all experience. Most of us wouldn't be meditating if there wasn't some kind of a calling. Definitely if there wasn't some kind of a struggle, right? And some kind of a departure from our, known way of being. I think meditation really, and Buddhism and the teachings really lead us to a new way of being. It's not that we change as much as our perception and our openness and our ability to kind of be present shifts. So the struggle that Siddhartha faced, and that, we all face, I think, to different degrees, but basically he had begun to kind of really go into this asceticism where he wasn't eating. He was kind of sitting in meditation and doing some yogic practices, but he would eat like, the story is like a grain of rice a day, which, I can't imagine somebody actually staying alive on a grain of rice a day. But what happened very quickly is that, Siddhartha became emaciated. So it was very challenging for him to even concentrate, like basically the starvation was kind of eating away at his brain. His ability to kind of focus was gone. He was exhausted all the time. And so, but this was the practice of concentration and kind of asceticism. And at some point, Siddhartha recognized, this is the opposite extreme of, the kind of having everything, so the constantly kind of seeking pleasurable experiences, and then this opposite extreme of really having nothing, almost to the point trying to kind of detach from the body. I think what Siddhartha was trying to do is prove, is there a soul? Because that's a common theme within Hindu or yogic traditions, and that the soul is somehow different than the body. And so there's some kind of like, if we can just completely divorce ourselves from this body, we're so attached to this body, if we can kind of really completely divorce ourselves from this body, then maybe this soul will appear. So these two extremes on both sides, and then at some point, Siddhartha recognized, hey, look, I'm not going to find my goal. Like, I'm not going to find full release. So he began to, take a bowl, basically a bowl of kind of rice milk a day. So he would drink a bowl of rice milk a day, and his ascetic kind of friends started to kind of judge him and say stuff like, he's losing his way on the path, or he's but he's very indulgent, right? Oh, look at how the ascetic Gautama is indulgent, drinking a bowl of rice milk a day. Clearly he's like he's given up the search. So Siddhartha actually separated from this group because they were basically talking shit, and went and sat on his own for a time. And after taking enough food and doing enough kind of different exercises and getting a little bit of sleep, not a lot of sleep, and really just finding what he called the middle way. which is the middle way between the two extremes, the extreme of asceticism and the extreme of indulgence, and finding the middle path. And over time, and not that long of time, the Siddhartha began to improve in his concentration, and he began to gain in strength. And then he basically remembered, which is interesting because the word sati, which is mindfulness, literally means to remember. So Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, remembered a time when he was young, like 8, 9 years old, and having kind of fell into this kind of meditative state at a, kind of like I think it was a harvest festival or something that was happening. And he fell into this very mindful, peaceful, calm, but yet not disconnected state. And this is what he called sati, mindfulness. And began to really develop more of this, how can I stay both connected to what's happening within me and around me in any given moment, and also maintain that level of kind of concentrated awareness. And this is what Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, discovered as the path to awakening, this kind of balance, because he began to see, okay, there's these processes that are happening in the mind, and then he could discern, are they helpful to kind of go down to kind of entertain, like, oh, is this thought train, is this let's see, I'm trying to remember the word between kind of wholesome and unwholesome thoughts. He began to discern between wholesome and unwholesome thoughts, and in doing so, kind of feeding this the wholesome thoughts and becoming more and more kind of clear. He also began, then what happens is what's called the battle with Mara. And the battle with Mara is really this kind of, maybe it was an externalization of the ego, but basically Mara is this, sometimes it's described as the Lord of Death. And one of the ways we think about it is to kind of keep us locked in this kind of egoic sense of, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, which is really a kind of a protective part, I, from a psychological perspective, believe that Mara is a part of our mind. It's a part of our being. And if we think about parts theory, so then there's also this, the already awakened part that's within all of us. And then there is this, there may be even several other parts that are present, but this kind of awakened mind and this kind of, kind of deluded mind are what are at play here. And Siddhartha, in his meditative, I think it was over about 7 days of really practicing, drinking rice milk once a day, doing some walking meditation, doing some yoga, staying really engaged in practice, that he began to kind of do battle with this deluded, kind of ignorant state of part. And that's this battle with Mara, where greed and hatred and delusion kind of continued in the way of the hindrances, as I've talked a lot about the hindrances, right? So hindrances are kind of getting lost in fantasy, or getting kind of sucked into miserliness or greed, or being restless or agitated or overwhelmed, perhaps. Sleepiness, or kind of lackadaisical, kind of drifting off, not caring, bored, and then doubt. You know? So these are known as the hindrances, and that they showed up in different ways. And Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, really kind of did battle with them in the way that we struggle with our own minds and our own feelings and our own stories. And so this is, I think, the representation of the Buddha to be, really kind of confronting the shit, you know. And, you know, I can only imagine, you know, feeling some guilt for leaving his son, and some, you know, some, like, you know, doubt around, you know, maybe this wasn't the right thing to do here, you know, maybe I should have stayed at the palace, you know, and maybe I should go back. And, you know, just all of the kind of ways in which we are kind of tossed around, I think, by the regret and remorse of the past, or the kind of anticipation of the future, or the planning, future planning, this kind of future and past that gets so, can get kind of carried away by it, the tide of future and past. And so this culmination of this battle with Mara is what's described as the struggle. Although it was helpful for Siddhartha to begin to see, it's called kusala akusala, so wholesome thoughts and unwholesome thoughts. So he began to see, okay, there's certain kind of images, or, you know, memories or thoughts that come up in the mind. And with a mindful, attentive awareness, third foundation of mindfulness, on the mind itself, you can begin, he would begin to follow and kind of see, okay, what happens if I feed this thought? What happens if I, you know, kind of give it the attention that it's asking for? And then he would very quickly recognize that it was very entangling, that it didn't feel very freeing, that there would be more thoughts, what he called papancha. So papancha is what we really call rumination, right? The thought that leads to another thought, that leads to another thought, that keeps us, that carries us further and further away from what's happening in the here and now. So he was able to kind of recognize that if it was an unskillful or unwholesome thought that led to feeding the hindrances, greed, hatred, and delusion in some way, then, you know, it would kind of further entangle the mind, and he wasn't any closer to that sense of peace or ease that he was hoping for. And then when he followed what would be called skillful thoughts or wholesome thoughts, generally are, you know, generosity, kindness, discernment, equanimity, these, you know, these kinds of thoughts or contemplations would lead to more release. Basically, he was kind of just like describing it, as he's describing it later, would lead to more release of attachment. So at some point, you know, the Buddha to be really vanquishes these, seeing the uselessness of greed, hatred, and ignorance, and discovers for himself the ultimate freedom of wisdom, nibbana, right? The word, or nirvana. Nibbana means the extinguishing of the flame. So he described the unwholesome, unskillful kind of thoughts and the associations with the hindrances as being like on fire, like burning. It was unpleasant, right? It was a burning sensation in the mind, and keeping. So he described the when he didn't feed those mental states, that there was the nibbana, the turning off or the shutting off of the flame, extinguishing the flame of suffering. So this is kind of what leads to the the awakening. So in the hero's journey, in the story, there is a calling, there is a departure, there is a struggle, there is an awakening, and there is a return. So, I think not only is the Buddhist story, useful in as a teaching, but it's also, I think, can apply to us, as I've been kind of hinting on, right? Where have we struggled, right? Where do we continue to struggle? Where has there been awakening? Can we further awaken? And I think that the way that the story goes, I think it's called the Four Watches of the Night. The evening that this happened, where Siddhartha became the Buddha and kind of came to a full awakening of knowledge and wisdom, and freedom from attachment. That he actually had several insights. That wasn't just the vanquishing of greed, hatred, and delusion, and the the kind of destruction of Mara, who doesn't actually get destroyed because it's part of the ego. It's still there. There are some actually aspects. So if you think back to these parts, there is the enlightened part that we all have, this wisdom part, this knowing that we can tap into in meditation. This is the awakened you, right? And then there is the this kind of destructive part of our own minds and hearts that kind of pulls us again and again towards greed and hatred and ignorance, right? Knowing, even though we know that hasn't actually ever helped us, kind of like using substances because it numbs and maybe gives us a sense of pleasure, but it doesn't actually help us resolve any of the pain or suffering that we might be experiencing. And that so much of this practice is about turning toward or being with the pain that we're experiencing in life. And I don't know why. I'm just going to say, I feel like the kind of what happens when we die, the kind of question that I think compels so many of us, is also, I think, what compelled this, of course, my interpretation, what compelled the Buddha to continue near the point of death, and then recognizing that the freedom isn't in death. The freedom is in awakening in this life. And so, but something about maybe his this early childhood trauma that continued that, because it takes a lot of effort. He had a lot of dedication to practice, and this is one of the things that he talked about later on as being one of the requisites, for awakening, is effort and concentration. Developing enough concentration to be steady in our experience, to not be bounced around by all of the different kind of skillful and unskillful thoughts, and to be able to kind of be with what is happening in our experience, enough mindfulness to be able to kind of recognize what's happening without being shaken by it. So a grounded awareness. And then, some amount of conviction, some amount of, perhaps it was, his first few teachers that could see they were close. They had developed deep concentration. They had developed, a deep level of asceticism, but hadn't quite been freed from the ego or the attachment to self or identity. So this awakening happened for the Buddha. He became the Buddha, the awakened one. And then the way the story goes is he really just kind of fell into a deep, blissful, meditative experience. And he stayed there for quite some time. And in this time, he was kind of surveying his life and then, you know, basically kind of what to do next. And then so we've talked about these different parts. Now in the story, it's a kind of angel or a deity that comes to visit the Buddha in this meditative, deep meditative, blissful state, urging him to teach the Dharma, right? The Dhamma, the truth of nature and of the nature of existence, right? And so the way I view it, though, just like Mara is a personification, I feel like Brahma is this kind of enlightened mind, heart mind, that this wisdom arose in him and this compassion arose in him to say, go out and teach. And there's this passage in this book, The Buddha and His Teachings, and this is by a monk named Narada, and it's a Sri Lankan publication. And so let's see. So this Brahma being, this godly being, exalted being, is kind of pleading with the is pleading with the Buddha. And then this is what, one of the things that happens in Buddhism is there's sets of three. So this part of, we'll say, this part of the Buddha's mind, or this Brahma, this kind of deity, which was not necessarily a god, but a kind of higher being, could say, pleads with the Buddha 3 times. And on the 3rd time, I'm going to kind of read from there, because what happens in the Buddhist teachings is that there's a lot of repetition and it's everything's asking 3 times and 3 teachings. And part of the reason why I think that is, to be honest, is because for hundreds of years in the time of the Buddha to the end of the 300 years after the Buddha died, the way that people remembered the teachings was to chant the teachings. And so the chanting 3 times, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, this kind of sacred kind of repetition, I think that's partially why it's been translated the way that it has. That's, of course, my thought about it. Anyway, this is what he has to say. This is kind of the Buddha retelling this bit of story. So when he appealed to the Buddha for the 3rd time, the exalted one, out of pity for beings, surveyed the world with his Buddha vision. As he surveyed thus, he saw beings with little and much dust in their eyes, with keen and dull intellect, with good and bad characteristics, beings who were easy and beings who were difficult to be taught, beings who are easy and beings who are difficult to be taught, and few others who with fear view evil and a life beyond. So, as in this case, so then he's looking over to this pond that's by him. And he says, as in this case of the blue, red, or white lotus pond, some lotuses are born in the water, grow in the water, remain immersed in the water, and thrive, plunged in the water. Some are born in the water, grow in the water, remain on the surface of the water. Some others are born in the water, grow in the water, and remain emerged out of the water, unsustained by the water. Even so, as the exalted one surveyed the world with his Buddha vision, he saw beings with little and no dust in their eyes, with keen and dull intellect, with good and bad characteristics, beings who are easy and difficult to be taught, and few others who with fear view evil and the life beyond. So he addressed the Brahma such. Opened to them are the doors to the deathless. Let those who have ears repose confidence, being aware of weariness. O Brahma, I did not teach amongst men this glorious or excellent Dharma. And then it continues. I'm going to kind of jump forward a little bit. So he's basically talking about there are those that he kind of surveyed out in his mind. There's all these different kinds of beings, and this was so difficult that I think within the next, he basically says this goes against the stream, right? People are so caught and with the dust in their eyes, they're so deluded, not seeing clearly. And then he kind of looked over to the lotus pond, and he kind of saw in his wisdom some lotus blossoms will rise above the water and bloom beautifully and can be seen and can be enjoyed and are not stained by the water. Some will bloom on the water and become perhaps stained by the water. Others will never emerge, breaking the surface, and stay kind of, that maybe bloom, but usually not, but stay kind of emerged. And then others will remain a seed. And this is it will remain a seed, will never kind of grow to the point of bloom. So what does this mean? Like how, I mean, in this teaching, this has always been a kind of a profound teaching for me, because what I hear is that the seed of the Dharma, the seed of awakening, is within each one of us. And depending on causes, conditions, on our the amount of dust that we have in our eyes, from lifetime to lifetime, perhaps, is depending on whether we will kind of grow and get the right conditions to awaken as the lotus blossom that rises above the water, breaching the water. So I've always just found that to be, I don't know, inspiring, and that we all have the potential. This is kind of what, and that for some it's going to be more difficult than others, but we all have the potential to free ourselves from suffering. And so out of that awakening, that understanding, this kind of contemplation, the Buddha, out of compassion, it's interesting, it says pity for the world, but I think that is actually, I don't know about that translation. I would translate it as out of compassion, moved by the reality that what else was he going to do with this life now that he has found his own release, but to try to teach those who are, their awakening is just below the surface, or they have less dust in their eyes. So that compelled him to go out and teach, right? So we'll stop there for now. I'll open for any questions or comments. Yeah. So anything that I've shared, or anything you'd like a little bit of clarification on?
Do you think there's any value in being an ascetic, having a more austere practice?
Well, it's a great question. What we asked is, do you think there's a value in the kind of ascetic, the kind of extreme? So what's interesting, I mean, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know because I've never gone to whatever the extreme is that the Buddha faced. Because in the middle way, which seems pretty fucking austere to me, is monkhood, right? So becoming a monk or a nun, you take on these precepts, and there's a sense of renunciation, which I feel like that's the main that's the kernel of wisdom in asceticism, is the renouncing of all, like the rat race, And in the times that I have ordained, or that I've gone on monastic retreats where I'm, following 8 to 10 precepts, not, sleeping on the floor, so there's lots of kind of ways that we can learn to have some form of renunciation. I have one of my teachers who has renounced they're still engaged in the world, but they've renounced in some very interesting ways. Like, his name's Badri Das, and he only wears 3 colors. He wears white, gray, and black, and that's it. So he does, sweatshirts, shirts, shoes, pants, everything. He just wears very simple clothing. And he fasts several days a week, and there's one day that he eats nothing. Okay? So that's another form of renunciation. For some, like a renunciation around sex or sexuality. For others, a renunciation around like holding money, like coveting money, this kinds of things, right? So there can be ways, I think, that that renunciation can be really helpful. Drug and alcohol, renunciation around, this is where the 5 precepts come into play. Renouncing, there's a teacher, Joseph Goldstein, who renounced gossip, and he was talking about how he took that kind of vow to not speak about anyone that wasn't in his presence. So this was like, and he did this for a year, where then what he began to kind of become acutely aware of is in groups, at parties, around dinner tables, people would inevitably want to talk about other people, and he would either stay silent or he would remove himself from the situation. So that was a form of renunciation. So I think we can all benefit from that. The extreme level of kind of starving yourself and I don't know, doing headstands, or even just removing yourself from society, like being off the grid, or a hermit, or something like that, which I think some people definitely do. And this is one of the things that happened in the time of the Buddha, that the Buddha discouraged that kind of extreme removal, extreme asceticism, because it was the engagement, it was the mindfulness, it was the kind of staying connected enough to, and then later to society, because he could have just stayed in that meditative state, and who knows what would have happened if that was the case. So yeah, so I guess that's kind of my answer. I feel like there's definitely, I don't know about the extreme. I've never done it. I mean, I've ordained as a monk, and took on 227 precepts, but I only did that temporarily. I did contemplate doing it forever, and I was kind of compelled to come back to the world, because I had some desires that I want. Like, one of them was, to have a business, or to have a family, or like there was wanted to continue to be of service in the world. That kind of staying removed in kind of a monastic life didn't seem like a very good use of my life's energy. So that's kind of what I came to. And yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think to some degree, but not to the extent. I think this is not found within Buddhism. And just about every other kind of religious group that has taken extreme asceticism, I think of the Jains, that they've all died out. You know, that it hasn't really been. I mean, in India there are still some Shivites, so kind of sadhus that kind of travel around and they're just wear rags and they paint their face with the ash of dead bodies of cremated to kind of there's a lot of ritual and they're exalted, but I don't know that helps people get free. Maybe. Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. Anything else? Thoughts, comments, reflections before we end? Oh, it's 9. Let's just end. So, of course, and any of the teaching that happens here is by donation, and we at the Against the Stream Center is continued to flourish due to the donation of those who attend. There's opportunity to do that at againstthestream.org or againstthestream.com, actually, I think it is. And you can just click donate or the Venmo Against the Stream Meditation. And then if you feel like it, if you're moved to share generosity towards me and the teachings, then you can do so through Venmo, Jason Murphy, or No BS Buddhist. All right, so just gather all the goodness of our practice, to take a moment to share in the merit, the goodness of our practice of expounding the Dharma, of teaching the Dharma. May any benefit, may this benefit be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings. May we all be free.